So hi everyone, welcome to Mark's 900. I'm Mark. Now you may remember from the last episode that my old tyres, my Metzler Roadtech 01 SEs that I've got on the Z900 have come to sort of end of life, and now it's time to replace them. So I've got my old gear on and my ripped jeans, and I'm going to replace them with these, which are the Pirelli Angel STs. Now the reason I chose these is because I've just bought a load of kit in order to be able to change it myself. I'll go into the prices in a minute, but what I wanted to do was to choose a tyre that helps me recoup some of that cost. So this is about £100 cheaper. Now it's got the same ratings on it that the old tyre has, so obviously it's the same size. It's a ZR17, so the speed rating is the same, and this is a 58W for weight on the front, and there's a 73W on the back, which is exactly the same as the other ones as well. So these should be, in theory, just as good as the old ones, and in fact they're a little bit newer as well, because these are 2022. So these tyres have been around for a long time. Hopefully they're going to be okay and they're going to wear well. Now why I chose these and not the other ones in this sort of price bracket is because I just like the tread pattern, if I'm honest with you. I mean, it sort of came down to that in the end, and these have actually got sort of pictures of angels etched onto them, and when that picture of the angel sort of wears off from normal usage, then what you're left with is the tread pattern, which looks like a devil, and in fact the devil's tails come down on the actual tread pattern down the side. So that's kind of fun. Completely useless and pointless, but it made me smile, so I went with those. Now then, I obviously had to buy a load of kit in order to be able to fit those tyres, so let's just talk through that. The first thing I got was a front stand. Now I was going to buy a front stand anyway, but I ended up buying this one, and it was really cheap and it's very poor quality. It's a Warrior, and it cost about £25. Now for the Z900, these things don't actually work very well on it. You'll see that I've actually had to bend them together because they're too wide to pick up the bike by its front forks. Also, the front forks on the Z900 kind of sit at different levels, so that's a bit of a problem. And this thing was so cheap that when I put it together, one of them was facing that way and the other one was facing that way. So I had to get a bar and bend this one round. I'm really not happy with this. I'm probably going to chuck it out as soon as I finish with it, but it'll do for now. It'll help me get the front wheel up and get the front wheel off. So a bit disappointed with that. I think what I'll probably invest in is one of the lifts that actually picks the front of the bike up under the headstock. So that aside, the other thing that I bought, which is from the same company, Warrior, is this thing, which is a wheel balancer. Again, it was pretty cheap. I think that one was about £40. I'll put the exact prices up. And the only problem I had with this is that there are bearings at the top that this sits on, and one of those bearings was seized because the washers either side of it were gripping it, so I had to change a load of washers on this, and now it spins nice and freely. It's also got a little spirit level here to tell me whether it's level or not, and that keeps falling out. So again, these products, these cheap products, there's a saying that says buy cheap, buy twice, and I think it's never applied so much as in the case of these two, although I don't think I'm going to have to buy that one again. I can make do with it. Other things I've had to buy is this little tool to remove the valve core. I had to buy a 14mm hex drive in order to get the front wheel off because I didn't have one of those. I bought some wheel weights for when I'm obviously doing the balancing. I bought enough wheel weights to last me probably for the rest of my life, and I took a couple of them out and I've sprayed them up black so that they look okay on the wheels. Now other things I've needed is this stuff, which is tyre lube, which helps me get the tyre on and off, and then the biggies. So I've got these things, which are the Motion Pro rim shield. So these click into the rims, and then and obviously when you do your levering to get the tyre off, they protect the rims. Now these are about as good as they get. These are the best quality you can get apparently. They cost about £15, which is rather a lot if I'm honest for a piece of plastic, but if they do the job and they protect my wheels, then I'm quite happy to spend 15 quid. The other thing I got, which is the big expense, is the tyre levers. Now I was going to look at one of those things that you bolt to the ground and then you get the handle and you kind of lever the tyre off that way, but I've seen people use them. They look quite hard work. You can scratch your rims really easily with them, and also I've got nowhere to store it, and I don't want to drill 4 holes in my patio in order to bolt it to the floor. So that one's kind of out, and I spent exactly the same amount of money, roughly sort of 75 quid, on some tyre levers. Now I could have bought tyre spoons, which would have cost me a fraction of this, and I would have had 3 of them and a set of rim shields with it as well. But the rim shields are really cheap, and they just look bendy and rubbish, and again I just do not want to damage the rims on my wheels. So I've got these things. It's the Motion Pro Bead Pro, and I got the idea because I watched Ari on MC Garage change a tyre using exactly these tools, and he did a fantastic job of it. So I thought, right, if it's good enough for Ari, then it's good enough for me. I'm going to go with these. But as I say, 75 quid. It's aluminium, and this part of it breaks the bead, and then you spin them around and you've got your tyre levers. Looks simple enough on the YouTube videos. What could possibly go wrong? Now the final thing that I've got is this thing that I've got everything rested on top of. So what I did was I found this old pallet lying around in a hedge. Half of it was rotten, so I chopped it off, and then I created a hole in it there. And the idea is I'm going to be able to put the wheel on top of there, and the brake rotors will sit in that gap, and then when I'm putting pressure down on the tyre in order to fit it, I'm not going to be damaging my brake rotors or my rear sprocket or anything like that. So I thought that was a pretty good idea. And then I happened to find a bit of old carpet, so I cut a square into that, and I thought, well, let's do it like that. So the wheel is going to be getting put on top of there, so I can do the changing, get the tyre levers on there. Well, I mean, it sounds simple enough, doesn't it? Okay, so I think that's everything that I bought. As I say, in terms of cost, I've spent around about, I'm not including the front stand in this because I would have bought that anyway, so the stuff that I had to buy specifically for changing wheels or changing tyres cost me about £150. Now, I'm saving roughly 50 quid on fitting charges, and I'm saving £100 because I bought cheaper tyres. Now obviously I could have bought those anyway, but if I'd have gone to a shop, I probably would have just got the Metzlers again. But the fact that I'm doing it myself, I've got the cheaper tyres, and as I say, I've saved about 150 quid. So I reckon, optimistically, that I've just about broken even. Now you will spot the eagle-eyed amongst you. There is one thing I'm missing, which is a way to actually inflate the tyre, and particularly to inflate it and get the bead to pop onto the rim. So we'll come to that when we start going through the video. So what I'm going to do now is go and jack the bike up on the stands, get the back wheel off first and do that one, and let's see how it goes. So there's the rear wheel off the bike on the front drive. That's no problem because I've got a decent stand, and then I take the sprocket off the rear wheel just by pulling it off like that, so it comes off nice and easily. Quick inspection to make sure things are okay, and then take the rubber bits out of the wheel as well, otherwise they'll just get thrown across the floor. So put all that somewhere where you're not going to lose it. You see, I can doing everything here on my big rubber mat, which is very useful. Next thing to do then is take all the air out of the tyre. Now you can't just press the valve in and let the air come out. That takes ages and you can't get all the air out, so you've got to remove the core of the valve with one of those little tools. And as I say, they're about 4 quid each, so not a problem. So just unscrew it and the air comes rushing out. It makes quite a noise, louder than you think it's going to be. And that gets the tyre completely flat. So, good news, now that the tyre's flat, we're going to crack on and start breaking the first bead. Obviously, standing on it isn't going to break it, so you do have to use a tool. And the first thing to do is lube it all up. And what I'm using here is what's commonly known as Windex. Now, I couldn't find any Windex, so I'm using the Tesco home brand version. It's only about £1 for a bottle, and it seems to do the job. It makes rubber very, very slippery and helps with this whole process of bead breaking and slipping the bead off the rim. So I'm going to grab my tools and then get cracking with getting this bead off. So as we come over to the tyre, I'm going to put some weight down on the edge of the tyre, put in the first part of the bead breaking tool, which is like the bit that looks like a fork. So that goes in there, get it nicely seated under the rim, and then the other one goes on top of it, and then you pull them together and then press down, and it pushes that part of the bead off the rim. Really easily done. But of course it doesn't push too much off because it's a very narrow tool, so you just have to do it again, just inch your way along, and once you've done it probably 2 or 3 times, it just gets to the point where the rest of the tyre will just come off. So Now this is genuinely the first time I've ever done this, so I'm kind of fumbling my way around a little bit, just finding my way, but really isn't difficult at all. And when I went on to do the front tyre after this, I did it really quickly because I'd done it once. So, you know, if you can get yourself a tyre to practice on, that would be highly recommended. Now just one thing to bear in mind if you're using a bead pro like I am, which is that when you put that between the tyre and the rim, so into the bead, you've got to be careful not to scrape the inside of the wheel. So I did put a few scratches on the inside of my wheel. And of course they're not in a place where you're going to see them because they're going to be covered by a tyre, but it's best not to do it anyway. So as you can see, I've managed to actually break that bead now. I've worked my way all around the tyre. So that's one bead well and truly off and hands in the air in celebration. Then I've got to flip the wheel over, and I realise at this point that the hub of that wheel is actually causing it to rock around on the floor like that. I don't want to put pressure on it, so I need to go off and get my wooden pallet. So standard thing now, same again, I'm going to put some lubricant round, and then I'm going to get my bead breakers in there and break that side as well. So same thing again, I'm going to get the forked end of the bead pro into there and start levering it up. This time though, I'll be a lot more careful so that I don't make any scratches on the inside of the wheel. And it's a lot easier this time, still making a bit of a meal of it. As I say, I got much better at it by the time I got round to the front tyre. So the use of knees and hands, and before you know it, you're all the way around, and it's just push the tyre off like that. Nice and easy, make sure it's off with your foot, and job done. So the next job is to get the plastic shields on, just hook those over the rims and get the tyre levers underneath. Now to be honest, this bit's probably easier than breaking the bead. You just gradually inch your way round and then the tyre pops off, and so as long as you're using your plastic rim protector, you're not going to scuff your rims at all. It doesn't matter if you damage these tyres, so you can lever away to your heart's content, but just don't be tempted to use the levers without those plastic things underneath them. Now, once that's all off, I got to the stage where I just needed to get the final rim off the wheel, and I could not do it. I spent ages at this stage trying to do this. I didn't film it all. I just couldn't work out how to get the levers in, what angle to put them at, and all the rest of it. So in the end, I put a bit more lube on. I lay it down on the floor, put my feet on the tyre, and then I just simply pulled up on the wheel and it popped away from the tyre. I just don't know why I didn't do that in the first place. I got stuck on that bit for ages. But there we go, wheel off and job done. So the next job now is just to rub around it with a rag and some cleaning fluid. Again, I use the sort of Windex window cleaning stuff. And this of course is really important to make sure that the new wheel and the new bead makes a good seal with the wheel so that the air can't escape. Now that's all done and we get onto the wheel balance. So this is a tip I picked up off somebody else off YouTube that said have a look at the wheel balance without the tyre on, so you can find out which is the heaviest part of your wheel. Now it's always assumed to be where the valve is, but actually that's not the case, and it's certainly not the case for my back wheel. So I checked it this way and then I flipped the wheel round and checked it again, and sure enough, the heaviest point is not where the valve is. Now this is important because the lightest part of the tyre, which is marked by a red dot, needs to line up with the heaviest part of the wheel, and that way they kind of balance each other out. So I was able to do that really accurately rather than just making this assumption that the valve is indeed the heaviest part. So there we are, flipping the wheel around and just checking it both ways. I have of course made sure that the wheel balancing machine is absolutely level before I do this, but there's no harm in double checking. And actually I've seen other people doing this with by putting the axle back through the wheel and then putting the whole thing across a couple of axle stands. So I guess that'll do the job as well. I mean, I don't know, I didn't think of that, might have saved a few quid. I guess it's not quite as accurate, but it'll work. Right, so there we go. As I say, I flipped the wheel round and I've got exactly the same result from both ways. It's quite therapeutic doing all this wheel balancing stuff. So then we move on to actually fitting the tyre. Now, would you believe it, but I completely forgot to turn the camera on, so you've got some close-up fuzzy CCTV images of me just lubing up the tyre to start with, also lubing up the rim, and for this I'm using my gel that I bought in a pot. Now, good news, I remembered to put the lid on the pot this time, but later on when I used it I forgot, and then I kicked it all over the place, and I had that rubber mat covered in a lubricant. It became very, very slippy indeed. Anyway, back to fitting this tyre, and it should be easy enough to push this first bead over the rim of the wheel. So I just line it up, push over on one side, and then as usual you work your way around, and I'm going to work my way around to the other side, and just to make sure that pops into place I'm going to put the full weight of my 13 stone onto the opposite side, push down and there it goes, and I roll across the floor. So that's it, the first one's on, and now we've just got to get the second one on. Now then, this next bit, particularly with the rear tyre, went very, very well. In fact, it was much easier than I thought it was going to be. I copied exactly what they did on MC Garage. I started off at one edge and I used one hand on either side and my knees and just worked my way around until my hands met at the top. Don't forget, of course, you've got to use your plastic rim protectors. They are, I can't lie, a little bit of a faff because you're levering on top of them, and then when you want to move an inch, you've got to try and move that rim protector with it, and sometimes they get stuck under the tyre. But just do not be tempted at any point to try and lever things without those in place, as I've said before. So I kept working my way round. By this stage I was sweating, my knees were hurting, and I was getting really tired, but I could see that this tyre was going to go onto the wheel. So what a relief when that tyre actually went on. And the next bit was supposed to be really easy because all I was going to do was fill it full of air so that the bead pops onto the wheel. You've probably seen this done before. You fill it with a bit of pressure and you get a really loud bang like a gunshot and it goes on. So I couldn't do that with my foot pump. I couldn't do it at the garage pump. So my neighbour had to come around with his compressor and bang, you can see it go on there. That took far too long to get sorted. But then we go on to the front wheel. I fitted that in exactly the same way. It was slightly more difficult because the brake rotors are in the way, and if I did that again I'd take the brake rotors off. But I managed to get the tyre on. Getting the tyre on was a nightmare. So getting the old one off, easy enough. The new one, I just could not lever it on. I think it was partly because the rotors were in the way, partly because I was worn out. I just couldn't get it, and in the end my wife came and helped me. So we got the tyre on together. I checked it for leaks there, and then I got it up and I balanced it. Now the front one actually took a couple of weights to get the wheel balanced correctly. The rear one was much easier. It didn't need any weight sticking to it at all. So in the end, of all those weights that I bought, I actually used two 20-gram weights that were stuck onto this one. And as I sort of mentioned before, this is one of those jobs you really can't rush. It's just a case of pull up a chair and sit there, just spin the wheel gently and wait for it to settle and find out where the heavy spots are and so on. I did of course do the thing that I did with the rear wheel as well, which is where I tested where the heaviest part of that wheel was, and again it wasn't where the valve was, so don't take that for granted. Anyway, so I had to put a couple of weights on this one, not really a problem. Once that was done, it was a case of just getting that front wheel back onto the bike, which I was really relieved to do because I'd used that dodgy front paddock stand, and so I had it on the paddock stand. I also had a jack under the bike, and I also put the axle back through and put an axle stand under it, and that's how much I didn't trust it. Anyway, all back together, tyres on the bike, and it's looking marvellous. Look at that. So I think that's a good looking tyre. I hope they stay inflated. I hope they test ride okay, and let's see what the longevity of them is like. But for now, what I need to do is have a clear up and a bit of a summary. Right, I've finally finished. The new tyres are on the bike, and that's one of the hardest jobs I've ever done. So that's taken quite a few hours, to be honest with you. Would I do it again? Oh God, I don't know. Maybe in a year when I've recovered from doing it this time. But right now, I don't want to change another tyre for a good long time. So thanks very much for watching. Don't know what we'll do next time. Something mad. So keep your chains oiled, and I'll see you soon. So here's me a week later up in the Peak District on a road called the Snake Pass. I've done about 500 miles on these new tyres, and I haven't lost a single PSI of pressure. Also, now that they're scrubbed in, they've been performing brilliantly. Fine on the bends, fine in the wet and dry, so I'm really pleased with them. Anyway, I'll see you all soon.